there's a couple of things I'd like to say first. I'd like to thank Penelope and yourself for including me in the project, which I felt very honoured to be involved in. I probably wasn't a typical choice for an essay. I think I was given the essay because our artwork application was rejected. We wanted to, if Sarah can remember properly, we wanted to saw logs up and put them all through Australia Square in the foyer, paint them gold, and have people making little Joseph Albers like a roller print they could take away. But that required them to dry on lines and come back and get them with real gold paint. And it was rejected. So they let me write an essay instead, which I think I was probably better suited to. So thank you for that. I can't believe it. And second, and on top of that, for me, it's a very personal day. We've had a very long day already, dispatching, if you like, Sydney Ball to art history this morning. Was a very big deal, and it somehow ties into all of this because one of the key painters that Harry greatly admired was Sydney Ball, and he placed the Heriot Wall at the opening of the Australian Embassy in Paris. It was no mistake that he picked Harry for that, for a number of reasons. But he also, at the same time, Penelope and Harry put Indigenous art. We're talking 1973, 4, 76. So we still learn. We don't know about Australian art at that point, really. We know there's numbered pieces in huge museum collections. We don't know yet about Yundamu and everything else. And here we have an Australian architect insisting at his own expense that these works be sent and placed in the Australian Embassy. And that, to me, was a very pivotal idea, and it taught me something about Harry Seidler that I hadn't realised. So this was on my mind when I was tasked to write an essay about Harry Seidler and Australian art. And given my personal background in my PhD research, as I'd been looking at why we didn't like abstraction in Australian art, generalising, there is, I sort of identified in my paper a long bias against it. And to wit, I argued and argued and argued at uni, and nearly got thrown out twice during my PhD, arguing these various points. And so I needed to look for things to do and ways to prove my point. So while I was at university, I opened first mock projects and then SNO, which was an acronym for Sydney Non-Objective. And we made a rule that you couldn't show there unless your work was totally art concrete or totally abstractionist, and that you had a valid reason for making it. And I was told by my lecturer at the time that we'd last a week. That program is in its 12th year and is booked out for another couple of years to go, and is still, and we've done, by the time I wore out, I had done 65 monthly group exhibitions featuring senior Australian artists and emerging artists on the same platform, back to back. Sarah eventually pulled me out and said, enough, and other people now run it. But that led me into this arena of the crossover between art and architectural ideas, because these types of artists nearly always shared a similar sensibility about who they were interested in, and they were very interested in architecture at the same time. There was strong links. So I think in a way I was a good choice to write a paper about Harry Seidler. And now, secondary to that, I think I was a good choice because as a child, my mother worked for Ordman and T.J. Thompson's on the 40th floor of the Australia Square. And I used to have to wait every afternoon after school for her to finish work. And I spent my childhood staring at Le Corbusier and Calder and wandering around this Gothic environment, as Harry puts it, if I'm not incorrect about that. He made a village around that building, even though it's got this incredible rise. It's actually a village place. And so I grew up with this stuff, and I was a huge fan of Harry Seidler all my life. So you can imagine how thrilled I was when they said, would you like to write an essay? I said, yes. So off I went. Sarah had no idea what I was doing, neither did I. And I decided to look at what might be more interesting, given that the other ideas I knew the other ideas were very interesting, and they didn't need another person lumping onto them. So I decided to look at what people thought of the Seidlers themselves and their role as culture providers in Australian art. And what I found was a very surprising set of disparities. I don't know if Penelope remembers, but I temerariously asked you at an interview, did you think, that day that I came in, we had a meeting, I said to you, do you think that you significantly contributed to Australian art and its collection? And you curtly replied to me, of course we did. But, which was great, because I wanted to hear it said. Because I'd been talking to Eric Searens, who owns the Max Japan collection of photographs of all of the Seidler material. And I'd asked Eric, have you got a list of all the Australian artists in the photos, in the Harry Seidler photos? And he said to me, which one? And I said, any of them. And he said, there's 3,900 photos that I know of, all of them proper photos. And I said, so do we have a list? He said, no. And so immediately what opened up was a mystery. We didn't know actually how many Australian artists were filmed by Japan and other photographs, Golding and others. John Gollings, and others. And so that led me into my essay about Harry Seidler and reductive art in Australia in a two-pronged approach. I wanted to show that the people that I'd been working with, younger artists who were making very extreme forms or radical styles of what looked like modernist art, but it was not. It was post-20th century. It was a re-engagement with a long, and what we all considered an alternate history of abstraction in Australian art that had been defined by the opposition. And what I mean by that is that the main history of Australian art had really been written and defined by the Bernard Smith school of thinking, which said that if art isn't based on the social realist drive, it has no purpose for us in terms of nation building, identity building, and image building of ourselves. And he even published in the Great Antipodean Manifesto that it was the job of contemporary Australian artists to be mystagogues. And I had to look that up. I had no idea what that meant, but it translates into a person who takes falsehoods or myths and turns them into facts that are cultural beliefs. And when you look at that, and you look at the Antipodean movement, for example, and the kinds of art that is championed in the sales rooms and everywhere else, are these